Ready when you are.
Okay. Good afternoon. I would like to call to order this special meeting of the Encinitas City Council for Wednesday, March 20th, 2024 at 3 p.m. And if the clerk would please call the roll.
Absolutely. Councilmember Lyons?
Here.
Councilmember Ehlers?
Here.
Councilmember Hensy? Here. Deputy Member Blackwell is absent, and Mayor Kranz.
Here.
Member will show that all members are present with the exception of Deputy Mayor Blackwell, and if she should arrive, we will note the time she arrived.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So we are here to discuss the Leucadia Area Watershed Drainage Feasibility Study, which was undertaken several years ago by Q3. And I think the lead on that was Mr. Tom Ryan, who is here with us today, and he is joined by Jill Bankston, who was his supervisor on the project, I suppose. She is the city engineer. So with that, we will get started.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, council members, members of the audience. As the mayor mentioned, we're here to present information on the Leucadia Watershed Master Plan update, which was a focus study of drainage, potential drainage improvements and opportunities in the North Vulcan corridor. So this slide explains a little bit about the objectives of the project that was undertaken. Oh, hold on. There we go. Thank you. So we were looking at a 100-year, 24-hour storm mitigation, what kind of improvements would be needed. The background or the basis for this study is that this study assumed that the improvements that had already been designed on North Coast Highway 101 were in place. What additional improvements would be needed on Vulcan to meet that 100-year storm criteria? So we reached out to Q3 and we hired Mr. Ryan, seated next to me, to do hydraulic analysis, to evaluate potential water quality improvements throughout the region, and give us some cost estimates and some discrete projects that we could undertake to achieve that 100-year storm criteria. And he prepared the final report that was attached to this item. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tom to get into the nitty-gritty. Yes.
Before you pass it over, that previous slide had a bullet point in it that said, evaluate regional water quality potential solutions. What does that mean?
Tom, do you want to take that on?
Sure. So one of the ideas on the study was to take a look at, when we say regional, we mean how could we, if there's a possibility to treat a large watershed area at a single site. And typically that would mean using a basin type of facility or something that we can take a lot of water through. So that was always a concern. It was especially with green infrastructure. So could we use green infrastructure on a large regional scale, not just a local scale?
Okay, so that was one of the initial goals was to evaluate those opportunities.
Yes, that was one of the initial goals was to take a look at a region.
Thank you.
Regional, yeah. Okay, so, all right, so as Jill mentioned, our focus here was a regional solution for, at the time, they were calling it big water. So 100-year, 24-hour, not necessarily looking at small solutions to individual locations that might flood, but rather can we identify a solution for a much larger region to get rid of some of the major flows and some of the major floods that the city was experiencing? So right here we have the study areas. The two main study areas were Leucadia and Old Encinitas, and this was the original scope. And what we identified, what we found out through the very beginning of the project was the focus very quickly went to Leucadia and not necessarily Old Encinitas. We still looked at the existing conditions, hydrology and hydraulics of both major watersheds, just to kind of identify, to make sure that there wasn't any other flooding issues there, and coordinating that with the city staff at the time.
Tom, my hearing isn't very good. Can you pull that microphone a little closer to you?
Okay, yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
So this is like taking a look at the Leucadia watershed, and we divided it up into these main focus areas. So of these main focus areas of Leucadia, and I know that there's some locations in the entire city that you can identify and point out, hey, we have some local flooding here, and we've experienced that during the process of the study. Now, one of the ideas here was to actually focus on the red, the green, and the kind of the teal green areas in the Leucadia watershed, because those were the main focuses of the city at the time because of the major flooding events that occurred, in addition to the L101 project that was going, which is identified in the green here, and that's the sub-area identified as the green. So we looked at the existing condition hydrology and hydraulics for that based on the Michael Baker International plans at the time, which I think were about 60% at the time. So what we did is we evaluated not just their plans and the watershed, but we looked at all the watersheds and how they were linked together to come up with a solution for the entire city or the entire region of Leucadia. This is the old Encinitas, so we identified all the storm drains. We ran the hydrology and the hydraulics. And we were surprised to see that there were, we found a lot of local little minor locations of flooding, but there was really no regional flooding. So that was confirmed by the city staff as well. So our focus went quickly towards Leucadia. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of the boring stuff, just to summarize. You guys have all looked at the report. And the reason for this is because in the beginning of this project, the city has identified that they wanted to use a specific process to evaluate this study, because as you know, there's been multiple studies in the past 30 years in Encinitas and Leucadia by multiple different consulting companies to try to identify solutions, and for one reason or another, they weren't moving forward. So looking at the more advanced modeling, stormwater modeling capabilities that are out there, which several companies can do, we were hired luckily to do it. And what this does is it kind of looks at the topography of the city and as a whole, and as a comprehensive model. So what this allows you to do is to add rainfall over the entire topographic feature of the city, let it run where it wants to run, and really identify, if you were to do an improvement at one location, how would it impact another location? And by doing this methodology, you can get the results very quickly, where you couldn't really get that in the old traditional models. So this just identifies, we use a newer hydrology, which was the newer rainfall, I should say, NOAA Atlas 14. The county of San Diego is moving towards NOAA Atlas 14, so we were kind of ahead of the game on this one. But we did use that rainfall, which is actually a little bit higher than what you had before, and this was to take into account climate change. So we use a net rainfall, so instead of using a percolation or an infiltration on the ground, we actually took the losses out of the rainfall based on the hydrology method. The only reason I'm bringing this up is because what that means is we used the San Diego hydrology methodology to come up with our design rainfall depths. So we didn't just come up with rainfall out of the air, we actually utilized their methodology. And one of the things that was very important when you're using models like this, big, robust models that take 2 days to run, is you want to validate them somehow. So if you don't have stream gauges and rain gauges next to each other, it's very difficult to validate a given hydraulics model. So what we do, and especially in urban areas like this, is we use historical photographs or video footage. And what we take, so what we identified, one of the first things I did is I did a scour. I had help of one of your residents, who was very helpful, by the way, gave me some photographs. But I had not just the photographs, but we had video footage, especially with the December 12th, 2014 storm event. That wasn't the worst storm we had, but it was the one that was the most documented, at least online. So what that means is we actually got the rainfall data from that storm event. We let it rain on our stormwater model, and we looked at the results and we tried to compare that to what the photographs really were. And so that really helped us understand what the, how accurate our models were. And then what we do is we tweak it from there until we get them pretty close or close what we feel comfortable with. So this is just an example of the December 12, 2014 storm event. And this is just an overlook of everything basically west of the 5 in the Leucadia area. So if we were to zoom in on this a little bit more on the next slide, I believe, for example, this is the famous Union Lake, Union Vulcan area. This was the December 12th, 2014 storm event. And you can't really tell from this picture, but we have a bigger version of this picture and a lot more of them where we actually see on some of the fences in the background, we knew exactly how high they were. We went out and measured it with a tape measure, and we were within a few inches of what our models were showing on this model here for the Union area. And likely, we were, I shouldn't say lucky enough, that's a bad term to use here, but during our process of our modeling, we had the Thanksgiving storm, which everybody here knows was quite large. Short duration storm event that incurred a lot of damage, especially at the park. So again, this one, we actually showed a depth of about 3.5 feet from that rain event. So we actually brought that, we actually had that rainfall, the raw rainfall data from the Leucadia rain station, rain gauge. And so we actually were able to model that, and we were very close with our results here. And this is important because you want to make sure, for the most part, especially in the big flooded areas that seem to be the concern, the main concern. I understand there's a lot of concerns with every flooding area, but the main concerns of the city at the time, that we were getting at least accurate results with our existing condition models. Now that tells us when we propose a solution, we can actually see what the real effects are of that solution. So,
That helpful neighbor, was he an Irishman?
I believe
Is he in
so.
the room today? Yes, Mr. Gary Murphy. Yes, with all those pictures.
Yes.
He's our librarian, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever the city had no as-built, he would tell me, or he would send them to me, so. Yeah. Yep, so as you can kind of, I mean, I should have told you to take a mental snapshot of that storm event from before. If you go back 2 more slides, sorry, right there. So you kind of see how this was the December 12th, 2014 storm event. A lot of flooding occurred. This will just give you an idea of what the county design storm event for the 100-year 24-hour is actually designed to. So you see how there's a lot more flooding here. This is quite a bit larger storm event than what, for example, that happened in 2014. I understand you guys had 2010, you had 2019, 2020. I mean, there were so many massive storm events that flooded everything. But this was a 100-year 24-hour. And now that doesn't just mean the biggest storm event for a 24-hour event for 100 years. What NOAA does is they do what's called a nested event. So they incorporate the maximum storm event for every duration up to 24 hours. So it's actually even bigger than what you would imagine a 24-hour event is. Unfortunately, this is what you have to design to with San Diego County. I say unfortunate because sometimes it produces storm drains that are so big that nobody can build them. They're just too expensive. So one of the big benefits of using an XP swim type of model, it's a much more advanced type of model that utilizes a more realistic approach, a much more highly advanced calculations than the traditional model. Overall results are you get more realistic storm drain sizes. They're actually smaller, so actually construction costs are way less than what you would originally have. So this is what happens if we use our proposed. So what we did is we went in and we proposed some storm drains in different areas, and we'll see kind of what those are. So it doesn't completely get rid of all of the flooding, and there's a point where we have to make an estimation of what we think is feasible. To get rid of 100% of the flooding sometimes can drive your prices up by a factor of 3. So sometimes we work with the cities and we say, hey, is there an acceptable amount of flooding? Maybe it's top of curb, maybe it's below the structures. But if it's only for a 1 hour period during a 100-year, 24-hour storm event, is that acceptable to save 50%? So that's kind of what we did here, is you'll see some flooded areas, but we believe this was the most feasible approach given the circumstances and what some of the, at the time, I believe it was actually Ed Wimmer that we were working with a lot at the time. Carl, I forgot his last name. Carl who? Yeah.
So a question about that slide right there. The bigger puddles, would they, or the heat map, whatever you want to call it there, is it capacity of the pipe that causes that flooding? So if you're looking at an 18-inch, if it went to a 24, maybe that would be reduced, or how does?
It's two things. One, it could be the capacity of the inlet, capacity of the pipes, and what made it very difficult here is one of the comments we heard early on in the review process from the public was, we don't want curb and gutter in the city or in Leucadia. We don't want that look. When you don't have 8-inch curb and gutters, it's really difficult to control a lot of this flooding. So when we have to deal with flows of 6 inches on rolled curbs, it's very easy to have that flow get up, over, and through some of these houses. So it made our job a lot more difficult to identify potential solutions. So we can put really big inlets there, but the flow will skip the curb just 10 feet upstream. So it's not as easy as saying, hey, let's put a bigger pipe, because the flow doesn't get there. A lot of these flooded areas are in the back of the houses. Right. So unfortunately, if we could put curb in, not that, I'm just saying if we had curb to work with, I think a lot of this would have gone away. So there was some, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It obviously looks a lot better and it's more natural. It's just there's some problems that will come with it with respect to flood control. So here's just kind of a look at the Vulcan system. Jill kind of mentioned that the L101 project, we gave the design team kind of our existing condition analysis and our preliminary analysis of the 60% design that they had. And, so they were moving it forward to the final design. So what we assumed was that was going to take care of the what we'll call the West Vulcan, or so the L101 watershed area. So we were focusing on the remainder, the really main two, which was the South Leucadia subarea and the Vulcan subarea. Those are the two really problematic areas that we were working with. So here's in red, this is just the Vulcan subarea and some of the laterals that extend. We understand that the laterals don't extend to all the low points. One of the ideas was there is a potential that even though a low point may not be connected to this lateral, that we could potentially connect that low point in the future, meaning by an 18-inch pipe or an inlet and a storm drain. The city has these models and can be easily evaluated, so it could be just tied in and just see what the impacts are, because I believe we do have a little bit of room in some of these pipes. So this is just a snapshot of what we call the Vulcan area. Now it's really important, this was mentioned way back in one of our first meetings. These three systems, this system here, the next system you're gonna see, which is the South Leucadia subarea, and the L101 all together give you the 100-year protection for Leucadia, at least this area of Leucadia. If you just build one, you're still going to flood in the others. By doing the L101 by itself, you're probably giving yourself a 20-year protection in that area, but you're not doing anything to the Vulcan or the South Leucadia area. So these three work together, and when we identified these, we actually looked at multiple options. We looked at the old option, I believe that Tetra Tech might have actually came up with it, but there was another, was it Rick Engineering, I think, came up with a 9-foot diameter pipe that went north. We looked at, do we have one big pipe going up north? Do we have one big pipe going down south? Do we do it on Vulcan? Do we do it on L101? And we looked at what the cost estimates of all of those ideas to come up with this solution, which what we thought could be phased in. And so if you build one at a time, it'll still provide benefit without having to construct the entire project. So this is the south, oh, I'm sorry, this is kind of a prioritization, I should say. That orange line you see on the right is the south storm drain. That blue kind of dashed line is kind of existing, or it's the L101 storm drain. So the yellow here, we came up with a prioritization of construction, what should be constructed first, and that was based on really two things. One was the need, and the second was really kind of how it would fit in with the rest of the project. So assuming L101 went in first, we believed at the time, and this one could have gone either way. You could have picked Vulcan first, or you could have picked the orange line, which is South Leucadia Storm Drain. Either one of those could have gone next. So that could change, and I believe there's some thought now that it might be changing. We may actually start looking into the South Leucadia Storm Drain next. So the yellow would be done last. That would be done. You need to get the downstream storm drain in first, so you're not sending more flow to a flooded area. So that was just kind of going through the priorities. Here in red, we just kind of, this is where I was talking about before, that it looks like now South might be actually becoming a priority one. The study lateral S1 would be accompanying that. So this is kind of the recommendations. I think the total cost at the time, there's, again, these are concept costs. This is a master plan, or actually it used to be called a master plan. Now it's called a feasibility study. These are really concept level, and they will be refined during design, but we came up with about a $30 million cost for the three, or the two.
So then now that the study is complete, staff's role is to look for potential grant funding opportunities, state, federal, local, and then we can look at potentially phasing in these projects. So if council direction is to pursue one or the other of the two main systems, we can put together some costs for the design and permitting of that first phase and offer that up with all the other priorities throughout the city during budget deliberation time. And with that, we're ready for questions.
Okay, why don't we work on preliminary questions, and then we'll go to I assume we got some speakers? Yes. Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, if you could go back to the cost you just had up there, the 30 million, does that include finishing the L101 segments? Nope. And do we have an estimate for that? I think staff gave a presentation on the 14th of February that had those estimates. It would be great to get them all in one chart where we could see the total, because the takeaway, it just confirmed for me that L101 is the first priority, and then the second and third could be flipped depending on what our preference is.
Yeah, so we have design and permitting complete for L101, so we're ready to go to construction. We've built $1.7 million worth of improvements with our streetscape segment A. We're doing another $6.8 million with the current streetscape project that's out to bid. So then this slide kind of shows the remaining pieces of the L101 that remain to be funded. It's about $21 million worth left to fund on Leucadia Streetscape, or the 101, plus the $30 million on Vulcan.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you. I just want some clarification on some things you said. You were saying, well, we're dealing with the Leucadia watershed, and I'm trying to see which of the exhibits actually shows the watershed. That might be helpful if you could get
colors on
to it. But then you were saying how it, by addressing the Leucadia watershed, how it had regional benefits. And I was wondering if you could clarify that. I didn't connect the dots.
Okay. So when we're looking at regional, I'm thinking of like a large area. So when I usually refer to local, I mean like an intersection or like a specific single location. You might have a flood. Regional is Vulcan, starting at Union in Vulcan and going north. It would be considered roadside park in addition to other flooding areas along the 101. south, it incorporates multiple different flooded locations. That's what I usually mean by regional. So if you were to look at the major flooded issues within the Leucadia area, I think we've hit, yes, there's a couple locations that do have flooding that we had a hard time getting to. And we can discuss, I have a feeling we're going to discuss those tonight. But this would take care of 90%, I think, of the major areas.
So just to make sure I understand what you're saying, the areas that are colored here are broader than just the yellow, which is the yellow is the East Leucadia. So by combining all these four together, you're characterizing that as a regional benefit.
Yeah, well, technically, like each one of these would be its own region. So like if you have a watershed would be a regional. So like like the green is a region, it's a watershed. The red is a watershed. The teal is a watershed. The yellow is a watershed. Maybe I should have said study area for Leucadia would be 4 watersheds. So that's probably a better way to look at it.
Okay, thanks. So, when I think of regional, I think of something that benefits Carlsbad and benefits,
Oh, yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
And I was thinking you weren't saying that, so yeah.
No, you're right. You're
weren't.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't benefit Carlsbad.
But looking at that map, I want to be clear as well. The eastern portion of the city from the golf course, basically west to the freeway or to Fulvia, you looked at it enough to be able to draw the arrows and chart not that one, the one.
The one before the yellow.
Yeah, so, but I mean, you got a big yellow area there, but when all was said and done, you focused almost exclusively on Fulvia West. So I see you looked at it enough to be able to chart with arrows and dotted lines the way the water falls in that area, but beyond that, you recognize fairly quickly that there aren't many flooding problems there, and that some of the newer neighborhoods up there have stormwater facilities already, and they have curb and gutter and other things. So I wanted to just kind of probe a little bit how much time you spent looking at that more easternmost, east of the 5 in the yellow area that's on the screen right now.
Sure. So the boundary between the yellow and the red is really fuzzy. So there's actually a low point in that area that you could basically draw the red further north, or you can keep the yellow the way it is. So that's kind of a mixed area. We did actually tie a little bit into 2 of those areas, and I know there's a 3rd area that we left alone. To answer your question, what we did is we had to model that yellow area as well as Old Encinitas, so we had to be very careful and input all the as-built information into the models, the rainfall, we had to look at the land uses, we had to identify where the curbs really existed, so the flows, sometimes the topography doesn't show it, so we have to actually manipulate the topography to show what's really out there. But you're absolutely correct, there's a lot more curb and gutter there. So it was able to contain in the streets much better, and you had a lot of steeper streets in some of those sections. So yes, we did actually look at it, and I would be careful and say that those areas between the red and the yellow, we did identify some issues, but they were taken care of as part of the red.
Well, and yes, and you said that the division between the red and the yellow is a low point, I think is what you said.
Correct.
Actually, it's not, it's just about halfway between, or a quarter of the way between Hymettus and Hygeia.
Yeah.
And, that's quite a bit downhill, right? And then it gets even further downhill to where Hermes in the bottom of the bowl, that's in that red area. But clearly, we have some issues on Glaucus at east of Hymettus. So some of your proposals do get into the yellow, but my main goal was to make sure that we were not misleading people, that there was a lot that we looked at specifically east of the 5. In
Correct.
terms of new facilities. I mean, obviously, you didn't put anything in the report about the idea of new facilities, and that's because we either deemed them adequate east of the 5, or not urgent enough to really address in this report?
Yes, so once we finished the existing model, originally we had a couple hot spots. So we go to the city and say, do you guys experience flooding here? And they said, no. So then we have to go out in the field, we look at it and say, oh, we forgot to put this curbs higher. So we put it in and then it goes away. So yes, we actually did have a back and forth with the city on this area as well as Old Encinitas to where we had a communication. They said, yeah, there's no flooding here. We're good with those. Don't propose anything, on this area. So that's kind of a back and forth we have in the beginning, yes.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Councilmember Ayers.
There we go. I'm trying to understand the teal area and how far over that red-green/teal boundary is. What is that? I can't read the little road there.
I wouldn't worry. So this exhibit is just a kind of an estimation. So what one of the benefits of using XP Swim, it can evaluate bifurcation, which what that means is when one watershed fills up enough, it actually spills into the next watershed. If we were to look at like a one-year storm event, you can probably identify and you can look at some of your older reports and really kind of detail where the drainage boundaries are. Once you get into a 10 to 15 to 25-year report or your storm event, what happens is when it floods and fills up, it starts to spill over and cascade down some of these other storm events. So that red line between red and yellow, between teal and red, is fuzzy. So the better way to look at it is if you were to look at one of our maximum depth maps, you can kind of see where the drainage boundaries want to go. And it's interesting because in our model, you can actually show animations and you can actually see where you can actually turn flow arrows on. And what that can do is you can see as the storm gets bigger and bigger, the flow arrows will switch and change and go into a different direction. For example, like the Union Vulcan Lake, that lake flows from the red, the teal, so it gets from both of those locations. So it's difficult to say where is that drainage area when the lake is from both.
So are these I'll call them natural topological flows, or do you actually take into account the storm system drains and showing where they're routed?
Storm drains are really the key for how we drew this.
Okay.
Now, I wouldn't say, one of the things that a lot of cities, not just Encinitas, but Encinitas was one of them, they say, can you give me the drainage area boundaries? Can you draw them out for us? And we say, for flat areas, it's impossible. So I can for a 1 year, just based on topography. Yeah. But for 100-year, they're commingled. And so that's the whole reason we use the two-dimensional models, because it'll actually map where all that goes. So this is just, this is not meant to be, a snapshot and say, okay, everything in this area definitely goes to this location. This is just kind of a rough estimation of the areas that we considered like within our models.
Yeah, and I know in reading through the report, you and I talking with Gary, Leucadia is pretty flat with slight undulations, and I was just trying to understand where Orpheus meets Vulcan on this map. Whether I think that's well into the teal, but I'm not sure.
Yes.
And then we've got that concrete line drainage, and I was trying to understand where that fit into this model. So, but as you say, it's vague. I would call it gray, but we're using colors, so it's
it's
some other shade.
So this is Orpheus right here, this line.
And I think that Leucadia isn't really very flat, and it's challenging because it has some bowls. And those are the problem areas that we're experiencing right now is, just west of the 101 is that bowl at Leucadia Roadside Park and in the alleyway. Hermes, water runs through my yard and hits the folks at Hermes. So, and I live on Hygeia. There are other yards that live on Hygeia, homes on Hygeia that flood because there's just enough of an uphill that before it can peak and go into Hermes, it's filling their house up. So there are some unique challenges with the topography. One last question. Are you able to plug in the impacts of the railroad corridor where they've built up with ballast, essentially a dam of sorts?
That work happened after we did our models. So we didn't actually input that into the existing condition models. I know they were out there, once we started doing the proposed conditions, I noticed they were doing some work out there. I know the T.Y. Lynn project for the undercrossing came in afterwards as well.
Yep. Okay, Madam Clerk, please call the speakers.
First speaker is Mike Hansberger, followed by June Hansberger, and then Gary Murphy with one-time donation from West Seacrest.
All right. It's my first time up here. Good afternoon, Mayor Kranz and City Council. My name is Mike Hansberger. I've been a resident of Encinitas for 30 years. I'm here today to speak on this agenda item number 1, the Leucadia Area Watershed Drainage Feasibility Study. Having looked over the study, I want to thank all the parties involved in assembling so much information so thoroughly. I learned a new word in bifurcation. As a teacher, that's always exciting. I do want to point out what I see as an oversight in this study, and that is the flooding that happens on the 400 block of East Glaucus Street in Leucadia. I've lived on East Glaucus for 22 years. I was here for all 3 of those validation storms. I remember 2 of them very well. I'd just like to share a quick video and a photo showing the flooding on our street and down our driveway. There's no sound, and I sped it up for time's sake, so it's going to have a little bit of a silent movie feel. But this is our driveway, and here we have what we refer to as Lake Glaucus. And what you can see is a lot of that runoff running both down the north and south sides of that is a lot of that's runoff from plumbed off of other residences, and now we're in our driveway. So once that bowl fills up, then it breaches over and then pretty much just washes us out. And this isn't really a substantial storm. This is a good one, but we've definitely had worse. But this is basically the flow of the water as it runs through. You can see there it's about ankle deep and flowing. And then it ends up in our yard, which we share with our neighbors behind us, and then eventually it leaches through. So, anyway, can we just go straight to the photo?
What year was that?
That year, I can't remember specifically, but we'll get like 3 or 4 of those a year. So what I'm hoping is, one, that this flooding on East Glaucus can be addressed maybe as an addendum to this study. In addition, I'm hoping that East Glaucus will be considered in the alternative alignment of the V2 map in the study, or even better, an addendum to the study to investigate the feasibility of having East Glaucus Street drain down Orpheus along the frontage of Orpheus and the 5 freeway. That's where our pump trucks go to drain water, which potentially we could access. We are a major thoroughfare, and my hope is for the safety of everyone that could be a possibility. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor, council members, staff, and consultant. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to talk about flooding in Leucadia. We have lived in Leucadia for over 25 years at this residence, and we have been dealing with flooding this entire time. So I appreciate us looking at it tonight. As you can see, this is showing, the blue arrow is where East Glaucus is, and I do want to thank city staff and everybody for helping us get we have 2 drains that collect the water now, and pump trucks do come and pump if it is not flooded in other parts too much. So city does know we've had this flooding issue for years. Could you go to the next slide, please? What I want to talk about is that our place, our East Glaucus, is right off of where the V2 extension is. So currently, they have the V2 going to the solid line right off of Encinitas onto a street that is a cul-de-sac, and it's dead-ended. And there's very little water that actually collects on that street, so I'm not sure why it's going there. It actually it's a private street, and it has a French drain, so I don't know why it's going there. The extension would be great. If we could get the extension up and up over the hill would be fabulous. Next slide, please. Can you hit play on this? So this is a more recent rain, and obviously this is not a huge rain because I'm outside. A lot of times, and my neighbor ran his dog over because he wanted to see how bad it was. I said, well, come on down. Let me show you what happens on just an average rain. We drain the entire neighborhood. There are 10 houses on our street, and every bit of water runs down that street, down my driveway to my backyard. I actually have rain boots that I have to wear to get in and out of the house. If you look, he's going up the hill. Everybody's water comes down. It comes from every single spot, from Encinitas at that side, Eolis the other side. We actually have neighbors that pump water onto the street. We not only get water, we get mud, soil, dirt, contaminants, everything is running down my driveway. So I have can you do the next slide, please? For the last 20 years, we've been dealing with this. And I do appreciate staff because you have been helpful. So this is why I am so shocked that our house and our street is not on this study, because it is known that we flood. So my proposal is either extend, and I made my own map here. So I took the V2 alignment where it is, and I drew the purple line. Can we please either extend that drain onto East Glaucus where there's actual flooding, where it terminates right now, there's a French drain, there is no flooding there. Or pull up a pipe from where the pump trucks drain down by the freeway. That's a storm drain, and I don't know why that wasn't incorporated into the current plan. So anyway, thank you. I am sorry I didn't make any of the other meetings. I don't know how I missed them, but I appreciate you all looking into this and adding us to this solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. How's everybody? Gary Murphy, 123 West Leucadia Boulevard. First thing I want to do is I want to compliment you guys. I've been working with council since 1995. I worked with all of the consultants. Barrett did the 9-foot diameter pipe that Tom brought up, and Rick Engineering came in and did the other ones that come through here. And I've read every report and everything that goes along. This is the first council and engineering department that went after the whole thing when you guys had Tom do the report, when Q3 did the report. You guys have worked with me. Not everybody has, but quite a few of you have. I'm hard to work with. Tom is fantastic. Q3 is probably the greatest thing that ever happened to the city of Encinitas. And I think we need to keep him on as our consultant so that way he can help this couple right here with their problems. But he has to know all the little nooks and crannies, and him and I have spent a lot of minutes, like hours. Okay, so he should get paid for having to put up with Gary and Murphy. But I want to compliment everybody in the city. I want to start with Public Works. Man, they have come so far, and they're kicking. There's Rob at Street Management, he is kicking it, and his men are fantastic. Jill and Matt are doing everything they can, but every which way they can. And you guys as a council, I'm going to compliment you. I don't do that very often for councils. We got a long ways to go. There's a lot of money that needs to be brought in. We've made some good improvements. Tony came up with the channel. Bruce and I were trying to figure out a channel out of the bottom. You came up with the upper channel, and the Public Works Department put it together like champions. It works. Leucadia Park, on the storm we had, wasn't a big one a couple weeks back, but the pump never got turned on, maybe just for a second. Alley was dry. They've come up with some good ideas. We have fixed that little area right through there by just taking care of the channel. So the southern part of this design is a plus, is doing the Vulcan Southern. Is that what you're calling it, Tom?
Southern.
Yep, the Southern Vulcan. And we got streetscape. We're $7 million short. I've done everything, and Tom will tell you. Can we raise it off the ground? Let's bring it up from 30 to 20 because we can save not going through OSHA. We can do scaffolding. We can do, and I've done everything. But there's a fall situation that kind of got in our way on that. The lobbyist is too long. We're on a deadline. So it's up to you guys now. You're going to have to pick up that phone and call some of your constituents, and they've worked in this room right here. That's Catherine, Tasha, and Mike was very, very generous to give us $4 million. But we were way short from the beginning. I knew we were under from the minute I heard that we had $4 million in what we were trying to accomplish from Jupiter and La Costa Avenue. You guys got to get on the phone, start talking to these guys and say, hey, we need to come up with another $7 million. We got $20 million going into streetscape. And we should be able to borrow 7 from that 20 and come up with 7 to finish streetscape at the time you want to finish it. And I know you can do it, but you got to put your job together. It's not going to be engineering because they don't have the lobbyists and they haven't got the grants that they can go for. But we need to go to the big top now. But we could finish this project because if we don't finish this project, we got chaos. We can't start segment B because segment C isn't completed yet. We got contracts with Michael Baker. He's supposed to be completing the project. That means the drain pipe. We've got contracts with the bank. They want completion. That is all of streetscape. We need to do this. We can do this. You guys have the power to do that. And I know you can do it. And when you do, people are going to see, wow, this is a council that really worked hard to get this project done right to where we can go forward. So kind of in this situation is I'm putting a lot of burden on you to go find me $7 million and let's finish segment C. Number 2, I think we need to have Q3 and Tom Ryan himself overseeing all of our drainage so he can get to know all of the neighbors of Leucadia that have these problems because he can do a better job on what his programming situation is doing when he knows where construction things have changed, modifications on what the contour of the area is. And like I said, the southern portion needs to be done. It's going to save the trailer park at Union and Vulcan. It's going to save all of Orpheus down there, and it's going to help to give us 20 more capacity in the 24-inch pipe. I don't mean to be hard on you guys, but, I've always told everybody, we're at each other in this chamber, but when we walk out the door, we're all friends. And I've always loved all of you guys, and we've been a lot of neighbors and friends for a long time. Please take the time to listen to me. Keep Q3 handling the drainage. Let Michael Baker do streetscape. Because we got into a situation a few months back where we may have had to tweak things to save money, and the guy that designed the pipe should be taking care of it. That gets a completed project. Thank you for your time, and have a wonderful afternoon.
One more speaker, Scott Campbell.
I don't often agree with Chair Hansberger on everything, but I do agree on this. I thought it was a huge oversight that Glaucus was not included, but Naiad was. I mean, they're one block away. It's even closer to the laterals. I think in addition, any place where we do the evaporator trucks should be definitely on this list. Any place where we permanently have pumps on standby should be on this list. We can't keep on counting on those things. I could throw out greenhouse gas production if that's a reason. It's a great report. Why did we wait so long to accept this report? How many flooding incidents have we had since this report was created December 2022? We've recently done a couple reports and we crammed them through, and I understand because we have a deadline in 2 weeks to get all these reports together or to mass report, but that's a different topic for later on. Please tell me this meeting was already scheduled and wasn't because of stuff I said last week. Please tell me that. And once again, I support all this drainage stuff. I'm wondering where the funding's going to come from. I'd like to hear a discussion of some possible sources of that today, this afternoon. Thank you. I'll see you again later on.
That concludes speakers.
Okay, thank you. I can tell you, Scott, that your comments last week didn't cause this to be scheduled. It was previously scheduled, so. Councilmember Lyons.
So I will just kind of speak for the public speakers and ask a few questions about, let's start with the questions and concerns about Glaucus not being included. Could we respond to that?
Sure. So originally, that area was included. You know, when we worked with the city at the time, they had just put in some dry wells. They were waiting to see if they were going to make any differences. But at the time, it was considered not to be top priority. So that's all I can say. Tying into V2, I think, is a potential possibility here. You're going to be bucking grade. And you'll probably have 25 feet of cover at one point, but that's not the end of the world. I think it can be done. But yeah, that is a location that we originally identified. It's in our models. You can see that it's flooded, especially going through all the houses. I mean, we actually show the flows going through the houses, your house. So yeah, so that was, I believe, I mean, again, this was 4 years ago when we went through this portion of the study. But I believe at the time, there had just been 2 years ago, they had constructed the dry wells in that location, and the focus wasn't, they weren't pushing to go to that location. They wanted to see if this had any help at all. Those two, I think there was 2 dry wells that are out there. So that was the thought at the time. We did actually have an 18-inch pipe go into that location, but again, it was very deep, and it kind of followed that. If you click back into the V2 alignment, you'll see a dashed line that we were going to tie into the corner of it. Yeah, so it should be right. Yeah.
I think we have a backup slide. Stand by.
Okay. And this is important, so
Any case,
we'll
yeah, so,
take your
I'll
time
use
and get
pass-
it. Visually, it's nice to see if you have an
It is
exhibit.
good to see. But that was one of our original areas that we were looking at, and it shows up in our models as flooding. And there's actually another area too that's very similar.
Just a little bit more then on how you prioritize. You said, well, it didn't reach the priority level in what regard? Why?
Usually that means what the city's focus is on with respect to what they consider important. So we have hydraulic capacity is one, so this would obviously be in a higher priority on that aspect. It also goes down to what regionally they believe is, and you made a comment about the private street. That was more of we were going by it anyway, so I actually just made the call to extend a lateral there because we had to, one of the priorities was from the south of there. So we had to draw the line, we had to take the V2 line up that way anyway, so I'm like, I'm just gonna go grab that area because it doesn't look good. So that's kind of how that all happened. It helped that low point because they also have a dry well that doesn't seem to be working as well. But you're right, I think there's a future project could be to go and grab that with an 18-inch pipe.
Okay.
Now that we understand that those dry wells are probably not making a big enough difference.
It sounds like, if I could just maybe summarize, that there's been a few things that have occurred that we now know better over the time period since this report was completed.
Yeah.
And maybe we could fine tune some of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And really improve our knowledge and our response to these.
Yeah, I think because the city had just finished completing that, I think they were like, "Oh, we actually did something here." So, no, you don't worry about that. Go get those other places, you know. But now that we see the impacts, that maybe that wasn't good enough. So I think now it could be slightly altered on that.
And then my last question for now is, we're continuing to rely on the pumps. So could you tell me the pros and cons of that? I would imagine, so I'm imagining, it's existing infrastructure, it does help, it does benefit. It'll save us money to continue to rely on them. Is there any other information we should know about that?
I would just say to that, this study is focusing on or maybe not regional is the word now, larger scale solutions. That doesn't mean that smaller, more intermediate, cheaper solutions couldn't be done in the meantime. Like I know the city is just now looking at pumping the Union, what I call the Union Lake, over to the north. They're pumping it south now that's actually a great benefit. That's a great thing. It works. We actually ran the hydraulics for it and showed that it doesn't adversely impact the existing system, so that's good. If you were to have a 100-year, 24-hour event, you're still going to flood, but this is helping for the other 90 years, so it's a big benefit. It's a smaller solution. The pumping trucks actually do provide a benefit. You have a system out here. The focus of this study was they didn't want any pumps. They wanted everything gravity. Mm-hmm. So they didn't want any maintenance having to get up at 3 a.m, get out there and make sure the sluice gate was open or closed, or are you sure you opened it? I'm pretty sure it's open. They didn't want any of that. They wanted everything gravity. So I do believe that there are some locations that could benefit from actual permanent pumps. I think and I think the system that's going on right now is the best you have. It's working the best that they have with what they have.
Okay, thank you.
And on the subject of dry wells, I think that it was a good effort, and at the very least, what it allowed was for the hose of the vac trucks to be dipped pretty deep into that, so that there could be a more vigorous removal of water. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it boiled down to how many vac trucks do we have, and on big storms, there were people that had dry wells that were panicking, and then the vac truck comes to the rescue and does their thing. But I remember once Risk Manager Schwarm was on the phone trying to get more vac trucks. We had a big storm, and she was scouring the region for more vac trucks. So, Councilmember Hensy.
Thank you. Yeah, just a little historical background. Tony and I served on the subcommittee that moved forward this whole study with Q3, and I thank Tony for that initiative because I was in such a hurry to see Streetscape completed. I'd had 2 friends who were nearly killed on Highway 101, and I was, very focused on making it safe for the above ground improvements. And it was Tony who, walked me through some memories of my own past, trying to get to Pawlecky Central when it was flooded, and always seeing kids with boogie boards in the roadside park, and putting it all together, like, why would we want to do all these surface improvements if we aren't doing the below ground improvements too? And I still am supportive of that direction. And I think we as a council are all still supportive of that direction. We want to see as much done as possible, especially in the areas that are already permitted and, almost shovel ready. We have some more design to do, I think. So I think with that being said, it's always been an issue of funding, and it's a matter of finding that money to finish it, and that's true with the streetscape. Where we're at with the Vulcan side is that we still have a whole bunch of work to do with getting through design, getting through permitting. So even if we had all the money right now, there would still be a long process for us to go forward with. So this is for folks like Gary, this study is a long time coming. Finally, we get to have the cost estimates and see exactly the whole picture, which I think has been a great benefit of your work, Tom. So thank you for that. And let me just check my phone right here, because I asked the city attorney for some advice on whether or not I can be supportive of this tax measure.
Thank you, Councilmember Hensy. Generally, this would not be the appropriate time to be supportive of the city's tax measure.
Okay, thank you. So I'll end my comments there, but I will say it's not a matter of political will at this point. It's really a matter of prioritizing the resources that we have and figuring out how to do the work on the top and the bottom of the street that is critically needed. So whatever we can do in this next budget cycle to move forward to the next phase for what we have permitted and complete, I'm supportive of. I've met Ms. Hansberger probably the year that you bought the house, or maybe the year after you bought the house, and I remember the constant flooding that you've been going through. So in the areas where we can make smaller improvements to have a big impact on these low portions of our city, I'm supportive of that as well. So those are my comments, and thank you for returning back with this effort in a time when, thankfully we've had all these storms to illustrate exactly how big the problem is. And so now is a time where we're hearing from more folks to ask us to find these solutions. So drainage isn't always the sexy thing to focus on when you're running for office, but it's critical. And I think that this is a good year for us to be having this discussion.
Thank you. Councilmember Ehlers.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated Gary bringing up the idea that Tony had put forth of pumping that trench, the Orpheus Trench, under and south instead of it was flowing north through a sluice case and all the way 1.7 miles to the north. And your long-term solution has it going south, which is probably, so we got to test a little bit in a fairly mild storm, but in a storm, and we saw the difference was no flooding whatsoever down by Union Street on Vulcan and the trailer park. None whatsoever, didn't even come out of the banks. So one of the things I would like to test next is move that pump from, instead of having to put it in the trough, move it to where it's deeper and floods across the road and pump from that point, which would be Union and Vulcan, to the same point to the north. Because I think the ultimate solution you're describing in this report does exactly that. It takes that water north in the future. And so it just seems like a logical next step and a way to mitigate temporarily. You know, we're pumping today, and the pumping today is just in lieu of having good large pipes in the ground. So this is one of those balancing acts between budget and operational expenses and saving as many properties as we can here, because that's the goal here, is to prevent from this day forward any of it. So that's one comment. The next comment is I totally agree with Gary's comment about I'd like to see us allocate some money to keep Tom on contract with us as our direct advisor on this. You clearly know the ins and outs, and you've looked at it in enough detail. You've been very gracious with me and spent a couple of times on the phone with me, helping me understand this document. I, too, am impressed with the document's quality, depth. Like I say, 20 years ago on Planning Commission, I was reading hydrology reports that were 2 pages of text and 50 pages of tables and didn't mean anything. This is actually a report that an administrative body like this can use and that the engineers can use. So I really appreciate that. So I support that. I wanted to go through the cost and a little bit, again, it's a prioritization. It's how quickly can we do it? When I jotted down a little summary table, and you've got half of it there. The L101 half would be the C unfunded. Yeah, there you go, 5.4. The B, which we haven't built yet and haven't put anything on top, the 13.5 and the 2, so that's another 20.9 million. If I sum them all up, 51.3 million. That's a lot of money, and obviously we're not going to come up with that tomorrow. But when I go starting with this one, the one that I think is the most urgent, absolutely the most urgent, is that 5.4. And anything we can do to find the 5.4 in the next few months would be great. We'd save money that we wouldn't have to dig up streetscape partially. And granted, now we moved the pipes, put the pipe we do have money for underneath the 2 roundabouts, and that's going to save a significant amount of rework. But anything we can do to get that segment fully funded and in there would be great. So switch to the other one, and then I think our pumping has shown that the 6.7 million South Leucadia is quite helpful to Basil, Leucadia Park, and the south. And at least based on everything I've read and talking with Gary and talking with Tom, what we're doing is what's the hydrological term for surcharging? Surcharging, another new word. Surcharging the pipe, meaning that we're putting so much through it's full. And what that has the effect of doing in Basel and at the Leucadia Park and other places is that there are one-way valves. When the pipe gets surcharged, they shut down. Basel no longer drains, Leucadia Park no longer drains, but we're pumping Leucadia Park up and over the hill, so at least there's some outlet. The idea is to take enough load off that 24-inch nuisance drain that during the majority of the 5, 10, maybe even 15-year storms, it continues to flow, it continues to drain, and then we won't have to be doing all the pumping at the park or Basel. So that's the 6.7. So if I had a priority, urgency, I'd look for 5.4 plus 6.7 and get those as fast as I possibly can, because I think that is going to get us to where our operational pumping is going to be much more manageable and much less likely to end up with flooding, damaging flooding. There's still going to be cases, and we need more money to get there, and we'll be talking about that in the future when we talk more about infrastructure. So. And I'm just going to do it one more time, Tom. I did it, I don't know how many times on the phone with you. If we implement what we just talked about here, the 51 million, you believe we can handle the 100-year, 24-hour design storm, and that is the county-wide threshold that we're looking to meet, the standard design threshold. Just confirm it one more time for me. I'm sorry.
Yes, so as you saw from, try this. Yeah, so it's a combination of all three. So it's the L101 storm drain, it's the Vulcan storm drain, and it's the Leucadia. So again, the focus is on the big water. The focus is on the main flooded areas. So you should have a dry Vulcan area. You should have a dry L101 project. South Leucadia should be dry. Granted, this doesn't take into account some of the other areas that were discussed tonight, but I think that could be added. I think there's some small pockets of drainage that we really can't get to because the pipes would be so deep. So there are some little pockets in Leucadia that are still going to have some flooding, but 90% of all the major flooding would be corrected in a 100-year, 24-hour storm.
And then on the, like the East Glaucus case, could some of that water be coming from uphill bifurcation that is occurring where if there was a drain upstream that you would not end up with more flow into that? Could that be explaining part of it? And maybe that's not in that exact case, but in general around Leucadia, the more the water we get into bigger channels, bigger pipes, the more water we get out of there and the less bifurcation overflow you get, and therefore the less downstream added water.
Yeah, let me try to find a difference map. So the green one, is it? It's one of the extra ones. It's the green one.
Like at the end.
Yeah. There.
This guy?
Right there. So this image right here is what we call a difference map. So what we do is we take the difference between with our proposed improvements versus existing conditions. So the darker green shows a benefit of over 2 feet. So that means we're going to reduce the flooding by over 2 feet. So this kind of shows in that East Glaucus area that it really doesn't impact it. So I think it has its own drainage area that's pretty well defined because it is a hole. And, can you zoom in on just this?
Use a mouse to show where.
Let me see.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on. Well,
Yeah, there you go. So go up. Yeah, right there. So there you see the Glaucus Street to the left of the big green blob. That big green blob is what that private storm drain can pick up. So we could actually, like we were discussing before, extend a smaller pipe out, or not a smaller pipe, but an 18-inch pipe out to Glaucus Street. You would have some pretty deep depths to construct that pipe, but it can be done. So at the time, again, Jill wasn't involved at that time. The decision was to not do that area. So, but to go back and answer your question, I don't know. I would have to look at this drainage area a little closer to see if we could, for example, in the north, take some of that flow north instead of down into this saddle.
Okay, and I'm not trying to solve it tonight,
Oh,
each
sure,
and every
sure,
one.
sure.
We received several emails from various neighbors that had maybe not this bad, but similar types of problems. So it's as we move forward, my goal tonight is to identify how big, how the big improvements we need in order to take the water away, so that we can then do smaller, much less expensive laterals into the necessary places. And this is going to be a long-term investment.
Yeah, so one of the goals when we do these types of facilities is we try to get it so you can tie in to these main lines any one of these little flooded areas, and it should take it. So we were pretty tight with these sizes here. So, for example, there's a couple little locations I would like to kind of take a look at. Like the V2 might have to be increased slightly as far as the size of the pipe downstream of the connection with V2 and the new proposed pipe. But, and there's a couple locations to the north of this I think you could probably grab as well and put them into the main Vulcan line. So that's usually when we do these types of facilities, we try to, we put fictitious little pipes out to these ponds to pick them up to see, okay, can the main pipe accept these flows if in the future you can grab them and bring them in.
Deputy Mayor Blackwell.
Yeah, thank you very much. So when I was a little girl growing up, I never thought I would enjoy a watershed drainage study so much. But I did, and I think it's because there's really good energy about we've got to do something. I appreciate all the previous comments about are there some interim measures, because this won't, this is a big apple to take a bite of. It's going to take a lot of bites. But can we get some interim measures to give us some relief? I think looking at some of those other hot spots, particularly East Glaucus, and I appreciate your commentary. We've got a lot of those. It'd be nice to at least know where they are and have them inventoried and studied. I do think going back to the big funding. So you've got on the screen here those three big buckets. We just looked at the L101, and Councilmember Ehlers talked about looking at segment C, the unfunded portion, which is about 5.4, and then the South Leucadia portion, which is the 6.7 million. My question, I think, is if we went in that order, I think I was reflecting on a comment, Tom, you made earlier about if you don't do them, you kind of could end up moving some of the problem, I think is what it was, or you will still have the trouble. But if we did them in that order, would it give us good relief, and then we can phase in the others? Is that the right way to think about the prioritization?
Correct. So when we come up with a prioritization or a phasing evaluation, we want to look at which piece would you put in first where you can still get a benefit. It's not going to fix everything, but it's not going to make anything worse. So that you really got to kind of build it in a series that will benefit. Each phase will create even more of a benefit and kind of, domino upwards. So.
Got it. And Jill, your last slide showed what we could start doing even going into this budget cycle. We have a workshop next week. Could you go to that? So maybe talk a little more about how you're thinking about it for the budget workshop.
Yeah, so we're doing our best to look at where we may be able to free up some funding from projects that have been completed and still have some funding sitting in them. We're looking at our mitigation fees to see where we can apply them. So we're looking to bring forward some information to council about many projects that need funding. Chief among them, in my eyes, would be the continuation of the segment C drainage on the 101, and then we'll be putting together a cost estimate to do the design and permitting, which is the first phase of one of the Leucadia segments, and we're looking at that southern piece.
And to be clear, if we were to find the 5.4 million for segment C soon, we could roll it into the existing project and get it done. Okay, so it's still feasible. All right. Okay, I think that answers my questions. Again, I really appreciate it. It was super informative, so yeah, it was good to have this forum as well.
Yes, and I accept responsibility for the fact that this report, we haven't had this conversation long before now. We did split off the critical 101 segment long ago and should have brought this back for more discussion sooner than today. I'm glad we're doing it now, at least, and exploring ways to address some of the important issues related to stormwater facilities. And I think that this conversation about how to come up with the money to finish the current segment of stormwater facilities north of Jupiter, we should include in that a real serious analysis. I know anything financial we are very serious about already, but about the possibility of approaching the infrastructure bank for the funding that would be necessary to finish out that segment. My hope is that when we get into the budget conversation, that we can do that. I know we're already going to be seeing the $6 million loan that we need to replenish reserves from the purchase of the parcel on the north east corner of LaCosta Avenue 101. But in the end, coming up with the money to finish this segment is critical because of the capacity that it will add to the facilities that we have in place. So we really want to exhaust it. The other issue that I think is worth a very serious look at, I was struck, I went back and watched the video from the meeting where a new Public Works Director, Carl Quorum, was at that staff dais for to get approval to apply for a grant that came, I think, from Caltrans, but I'm not 100% certain. It was $500,000, and there was some local match, and it was what Q3 was hired with. And that conversation was really good because the city manager at the time, Karen Brust, was working with the new Public Works Director to ask a fresh set of eyes, a new employee, really look at alternative and creative ways to handle stormwater. And during that meeting, I spoke about the notion of stormwater harvesting, and Russell Levan was the only speaker to the item, and he has been for 20 years now advocating that the roundabout at Hygeia and Leucadia Boulevard have a big storage facility underneath it so that the stormwater that's coming down Leucadia Boulevard, instead of being directed into the railroad corridor, it would be captured and reused. And so when I look at this study, I'm disappointed in the number of big fat round pipes that we have that are only designed to move water to either Cottonwood Creek or the Bataquitos Lagoon. And I think one of the challenges that we have in terms of grant applications and trying to tap into the infrastructure bill money that's available is that we're too old school. We have not implemented any facilities that will take pollutants out of the stormwater. We aren't harvesting any of the stormwater. So one of the things that I'd like to look at is if we're talking about retaining Q3 for additional work, would be to identify opportunities to use storm trap type facilities to augment what some of these proposals that we already have, so that we could perhaps make ourselves a little more competitive when it comes to obtaining grant money. And then when I look at the report, one of the things that occurs to me, I'm a I'm a kid that used to love a rainstorm, a good rainstorm. I grew up on Ocean View Avenue, and the first thing I did towards the end of those storms was go ride my bike through the big puddles that were on Orpheus, and that was really a lot of fun. I don't think that was when there were a lot of greenhouses and a lot of open fields. The homeowners there don't really like the puddles anymore, so we pump, right? But one question that I have when I look at this and what you've proposed is maybe we should be looking more to go east and using the facilities that Caltrans has. The Hansbergers talk about the pumping truck dumping into an Orpheus pipe that runs north to Bataquitos. That's obviously north of Leucadia Boulevard. But are there ways, when you look at where Orpheus floods between, say, in the vicinity of Puebla Street, is there a way to take that water north and use those facilities that Caltrans has? And that would alleviate all of the Orpheus water from even, having to figure out what to do with it when we move it to Vulcan. So I don't know if your study looked at any of those options or whether it was all about downhill west, when really there's a lot of downhill east of Orpheus and Eolus.
Yeah, we had I was lucky enough to have at least an understanding of the drainage facilities that run along the west side of the 5 freeway, because we did a lot of projects there with Caltrans. We actually developed wetlands. It was a constructed wetland and an infiltration basin right there at the La Costa off-ramp. So that storm drain actually is running pretty close to capacity as it is. So it didn't really occur to us to move flows from the Vulcan north. I mean, we didn't really look at it because they're running pretty close to capacity.
You mean Orpheus north, Vulcan north?
The Vulcan sub area, like
okay.
like the ponds, the V2, the V1 laterals. We didn't really look at those as far as moving them to the north. One, we'd still be bucking grade a little bit, but I mean, that's something that I guess we could look at, but my guess is we would have some improvements, and I don't want to touch anything in Caltrans as far as.
And that's the bottom line question is, would Caltrans even, entertain this notion, right?
No.
So we're putting our water in there, and then maybe they don't know it, and maybe I shouldn't be talking about it right now, huh?
With the pumping, yes, you're right. They don't know that.
Okay.
But
take it all back. Is this being recorded?
yeah, Caltrans is not easy to
Caltrans
deal
doesn't
with.
pay attention to us.
Yeah.
Okay.
But to go back to your question about the water quality, you're absolutely right. The focus here was a regional drainage, trying to figure out. And usually, I mean, originally this was called a master plan. We had to change the name because some people had issues with the terminology, so we came up with the drainage feasibility study. The goal of that is to come up with a concept, kind of what size facility it would take to mitigate a specific flood. Now, once you have that concept size, during the design phase, you come in and you can actually create whatever you want. You can actually create it as a box, you can create it as an open channel, you can create it as a natural facility. You're absolutely right to dress it up for funding purposes. I would absolutely, and we proposed in our concept plans, you'll see a lot of green infrastructure that's right adjacent to the pipe. So in the back of the report, you'll see I even highlighted in green. So like the plans are gray, they're black and white, and I put these green kind of facilities to kind of help with the idea of these can also provide a water quality benefit. Harvesting, there's a couple things with harvesting that we would want to be careful with. We actually have done a few harvesting facilities. When you capture a good amount of flow, enough to kind of make a dent with respect to flood control, like a big volume, you can only drip the system. You can't spray it because of bacteria. So what happens is, like a box, let's say 10 feet or 8 feet high by 40 feet long by 14 feet wide would probably take a year to drain. So the problem is like you capture it and then you try to get rid of it and you can't get rid of it fast enough unless you pump it to some other location. So we do it like for golf courses and things like that. But I think you can still capture portions and pods next to areas that you know need to be irrigated. So I think,
Yeah.
and that
And
would actually be very beneficial with respect to getting grant funding.
Yeah, and I appreciate that it's complicated. I've tried to play engineer a few times when I go to the Storm Trap website and I watch the video and then I've got answers, right? I
Yeah.
mean, and Jill is tired of hearing me talk about the Storm Trap website. But it's got a lot of really amazing videos and it does a lot of very important things.
Sure.
And for example, if you stored stormwater and maybe significant amounts, and you didn't harvest it, but you at least released it in a more controlled fashion. I think most people know that the UV treatment facility for Cottonwood Creek at 3rd and B Street bypasses the UV treatment during a storm event.
Yep.
And so there's no benefits to the UV treatment facility to, mitigate for the pollutants that we are discharging at Cottonwood Creek. So at the very least, if we store some of this water, we slow release it so that it can be treated as
Correct.
it's on its way to the ocean. So it may not be what we use for our irrigation system, but there are other uses that I think would be beneficial environmentally. So it's
Absolutely.
something that I'm very interested in learning more about. I've got a ton of questions, but we're limited in time, and there are other questions up here, but I do want to ask a couple more. One is I see that you've got, at least where the red line is on these drawings, the red line for the Vulcan, east of the railroad tracks, is in the railroad corridor. And my hope is that we're not thinking that we would put a significant investment in the railroad corridor. Okay, so that's more like in the middle of Vulcan is what the end result will be.
Correct.
So my knowledge of the flooding at Glaucus and Hermes and the challenges that we have there, West Seacrest has told me that I've learned more about challenges down by Jason as well. But the question that I have is, was there any thought given to taking the pipe down Hermes, at least to Jason, or maybe even if you look at the cul-de-sac on Hermes, there appears to be, we might have to negotiate some easement rights, but taking it through the yards to Sanford so that we can avoid, because then we're not moving the water west, we're essentially capturing it where it hits the bottom of the bowl, because there's a crown between Hermes and Vulcan that keeps, naturally wants to keep the water in that bowl. So instead of putting the pipe, and maybe it's because south of Leucadia Boulevard, we have to put pipe in Vulcan. And so you don't have to answer this question. It's just one that I want to float, the idea of being a little bit more intentional with addressing the bottom of the bowl at Hermes, which is a critical issue. The other question I have, some of your yellow lines for these proposals are going through private property. And so are we assuming that we're going to negotiate easement rights? And are we going to, is this trenchless pipe installation, or are we going to trench through yards?
Well, this, for example, on this particular image, like this V2 going up Glaucus Street, see how it kind of comes down angled? That was discussion of, yes, we would like to see if we can't get an easement. The whole purpose of that is because you'll be bucking grade and be very much more expensive to take it all the way over. But now that if we want to go and pick up Glaucus East, that might be a better way to go. So now that would take that out of the equation. You won't have to go after that easement. But there are a few locations where we do,
Need some easements.
yeah.
And is this all digging trenches?
Yes.
So there are some areas where this could get quite deep of digging a trench. Is there we just ruled out trenchless because of the cost, or?
No, trenches can be done. At the time, I work with KEC Construction. They're a really big Southern California contractor for all drainage type of structures. And so several of these locations, I'd call them up and say, here's the situation, we got this, what would you do? And he's like, oh, you can do a movable trench. You could do trenchless here, So For most of the cases here, if not all of them, they were giving me that we can go with the trench, and there's a movable trench technique that costs X amount, and here's how much I would charge. And that's kind of where I got my numbers on some of these more unique, difficult locations. But yeah, I usually like to go to the ones that do the design to tell me what's new in the industry, what can it be done. I mean, what are my options, things like that.
Okay, so looking at the, it is on page 54, it is the East Jason line, 24-inch reinforced concrete pipe. You're tying in some driveways. These are all based upon, looks like there's a drain right out in front of Wes's house on that particular map. Were you aware that they were planning a drain in front of your house? No. You would like one, though, I would guess. Yes. So that's good. So the other thing is that we did recently receive an email from a longtime Leucadia family that lives on Eucalyptus Street, and that is way to the north of Ashbury. And so I don't know whether there were any considerations to other neighborhoods that have flooding problems. We know that on the very north end of Hygeia, before it gets north of Ashbury, north of Hillcrest. Well, wait a minute. It's north of, yeah. So it's in two segments. We know the north end of Hygeia is got some flooding problems. And so I guess my point is there is, as well done as your report is, there are still some neighborhoods that we need to look at how to tie them into and consider them for, the solutions that are being proposed. I do also, though, wonder, and I don't know who is best prepared to answer this question, but where we were putting public facilities on private property, is that simply an easement? Do we need to be concerned about making improvements to private property at taxpayer expense? How does that all work?
I guess I would defer to our city attorney for that, to see if he has any concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are a number of nuances that are inherent when doing any type of improvements on private property or to public property. Typically, the city has to have a legal right of access, such as an easement or other type of agreement that will allow the city to access that project. And typically, the city cannot undertake public projects for private benefit, solely for private benefit.
Okay, not solely, but if we're building a facility and they grant us an easement, and maybe the lowest point in that particular neighborhood is on private property, there are ways that we can explore the possibility of using that location.
Correct. There are many issues that need to be discussed, but it is potentially possible.
And I think that, it's important to note that one of the charming funkiness aspects of Leucadia is its lack of curbs and gutters. And I know that's a somewhat controversial thing. I know that we also, as a city, have insisted that developments over the years add curbs and gutters, and then there are many large sections of streets that don't have curbs and gutters, so it's very incomplete. But it is one of the challenges in dealing with this. I know that on Hermes and Eucalyptus, one of the challenges that you have is, where does the drain go? Because the amorphous blob of water is moving in all sorts of locations. And as you pointed out, even as the intensity of the rain falls, that blob can move to an entirely different location. So I think that's illustrative of the challenge that we face. I'm sorry for going so long, Councilmember Lyons.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a few more comments to wrap up. One is, I first want to start by saying, Jill and Tom and Mayor, thank you for putting this forward today for discussion because, we're kind of drilling down on the details and we're hearing some detailed feedback, but it's so important to understand the breadth of all the details that go into this, and it's very helpful to the community. I appreciate that. I do want to state that because we've had the opportunity to have the infrastructure task force studying our broader citywide infrastructure needs for a year, and now we have some detail on the breadth of all the needs across the city, that we are in a position where we feel, actually, I feel personally, it's a little painful to understand how strong and serious our needs are for infrastructure, and to realize how little funds we have to deal with the breadth of needs. So given that, I do want to say that I'm in favor of what my colleagues have talked about today, in that when we look at our prioritization for what makes sense to move forward first, that we look at it in terms of chunks so we can make significant progress to achieve these goals. And I absolutely support achieving these goals, but to manage expectations with the revenue we currently have, it will take a long time. And I think everyone knows that. We're just anxious to get it going, and as long as we can and we're doing the right things first, then we're good, and I would be in support of that. So I would hope that when it comes to budgeting discussion, which is coming right up, that we have something we can really work with, not something that's out of our range of being able to afford. So that's my feedback, and that may vary from my colleagues up here a little bit. I do want to respond to the comment about us talking with our partners who are in leadership positions at the state and at the federal level. We do talk to them regularly about funding, and we will continue to talk to them. They're really engaged here in Encinitas. They think I'm just going to be overly broad here, but I think they think we're a smart city who's doing the right things, and they want to support us financially. And so that's good news. I think another thing I want to share to manage expectations is some of the initial feedback we've gotten this year is, being the situation at both the state and the federal level as far as budgets, and also that it's an election year, that we might need to expect there won't be as many resources available to help cities in general. But that's not going to prevent us from continuing to ask and continue to keep the dialogue going, because we do have the broad need, and I think we're doing all the right things to demonstrate we're being smart about how we're investing our money. So let's see. To that end, I do want to offer some information about pricing. I share the mayor's interest in the green infrastructure, and I know we tee that up in the document, and we talk about it on some level, but I think that there's a way we should shift how we talk about these improvements so that we can capture that green infrastructure better. Yes, it's pipes, but in order to move this forward and get funding and to achieve multiple goals, multiple benefits for our community, that green infrastructure is just imperative. And in my experience, when you're talking about rainwater harvesting, you're talking about cisterns, you're talking about pumping and reusing water. It takes a little bit more upfront in the design. Because you're really looking at micro basins, and you capture the smaller flow where you can, and in those smaller events, but and then see what you can do with different levels of events. So it's not a macro way to do the design. It's much more micro in the solution, but it's worth its weight in gold in how the solution can be more green, can be more environmentally sensitive, can really respond to our urban, but our heat island issues, to our canopy cover, to have more trees, to the permeability of our soil. If we can get our soil to have roots in it and be more permeable, then then the soil acts as a sponge much better than it does now, where it's very compacted and the water doesn't infiltrate. So I think that holistic, kind of broader way of looking at these improvements is the right way to talk about this, so that we're achieving multiple benefits. And I also think that it would be able to attract money from different sources. That would be helpful to us as well. There was another point I was going to make. Let me see. Oh, yeah. The final point on that is, I may have misunderstood this, and maybe you can clarify if I've got it wrong, but when I read the documents today, I was left with the impression that the funding the cost estimates were based on an assumption about the landscape costs based on our streetscape. Because that's a recent bid we got, so we've got information. So perhaps we used our streetscape bid as the basis for understanding what the landscape might be. I want to kind of challenge us a little bit to look at it a little bit differently, because a streetscape landscape is very intense as a streetscape, very hardscape, and other things associated with it, maybe much larger trees than we would need, and much, different irrigation. I think a green infrastructure landscape is a lot more affordable than a streetscape infrastructure. So Jill, did you want to shed some light on that?
So there's different components to streetscape, and just so that everybody's clear, so our streetscape project, yes, we're putting in big pipes, but we have biofiltration before we go into those pipes. So we're not just taking the runoff from the road and dumping it underground and sending it out to the ocean. We have flow-through planters that are areas that allow any kind of pollutants to settle out. And it is the cost estimate from those areas, not necessarily from the areas where we're trying to beautify and add trees. It's from kind of those flow-through biofiltration areas where we use that as a cost match.
Okay, that's a good match. That works, and I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. And I think that's the way to go. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Ayers.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Tom some questions more along the future capacity. I'm always looking 50 years down the road. We're putting in pipes. We're putting them 30 feet down, big pipes. You're going through calculations right now, and you said there was some capacity. Have we allowed for, in your hydrological study, capacity for increased runoff from future development? And if so, tell us about what future-proofing you've done on the size of the L101, the Vulcan pipes in particular.
When we do the ultimate conditions or the proposed conditions, we actually utilize the general plan land uses. So if there's any proposed, like if there's any proposed future development, it should show up there, at least it gives us an idea of what the land uses are. So even if it's an empty lot today, and it might be a commercial tomorrow, like we actually evaluate it as commercial. So existing conditions is what's on the ground today.
Okay.
Ultimate conditions, we actually use the general plan land uses.
Good. And then getting to the water capture, we had a conversation this week where I was asking about the fall of the 60-inch pipe under L101 and trying to understand why it had to be 30 feet down. And one of my goals thinking was along the lines of what the mayor's been going after is how at the end of the line can we have enough additional fall that we could run it over to, if we could get property or had property where we could store water and then still have fall enough to get back to where we are now. And so I think we are at the absolute minimum fall right now. Would you say 2 per 1,000 feet fall over?
Yeah, it's pretty small.
Over 9,000 feet. So it's gone a long way.
Very flat.
Under L101. And
contractors usually won't construct it that flat.
But there's still a possibility we could construct some facility. And I don't know whether I had this conversation with the mayor or not, but the Leucadia pump station for Encina wastewater is right not far from there. So one way, rather than trickling out the water through using it locally, maybe there's some future with one of the wastewater authorities. In this case, that one would be closest to Encina, that they could could capture the water. They have several acres open. Maybe they even have room to do some pretty major storage. Your comment to me on the phone was, in order to affect flooding, in order to mitigate flooding, you probably need on the order of 1 to 2 acre feet. Is that the number of storage in order to really address major flooding issues?
Yeah, but that's if you're looking at regional flood control mitigation. In the cases of like green infrastructure or water reuse, I mean, you could probably just pull off, you can have a much smaller system. And I would probably recommend a much smaller system, because I think if you're stuck with a 1.5 acre foot basin underground, you'll never drain it.
Well, I was going to the possibility that we could pump it out as yet another way and get potable water out of it in the end.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything against or in contrary to other local storm traps or whatever future storm water capture we would be doing. So could you make any comments about the choice of, right now the 60-inch pipe starts at 60-inch and it's a telescoping pipe that goes down to, I want to say 36 at the far southern end. Any thought given to making that larger, a 60-inch the whole way, or you don't see a need for that, or just comments? I didn't see that in the report.
Well, for the L101 we're talking about?
L101.
Okay. So the L101 we didn't spend a lot of time on because it was being taken care of as in the final design under the MBI project. So what we provided is we added it as far as the existing condition analysis, knowing that we also did a kind of a snapshot proposed condition based on 60% plans at the time, knowing that the plans are going to change, the streets are going to change. They actually added a bunch of inlets. They changed roundabout locations. So a lot of stuff changed between when we did our proposed condition and when the designer finalized the project. So we knew that. So we kind of took it didn't make sense to put a final proposed L101 pipe in when it was going to be, when we were running parallel with the design team that's going through final design. So we actually gave them our models pretty early on, and then they took it to the next level. So I wouldn't know, when we gave them those flow rates, that was just what it took to get the flow out. It wasn't we did actually look at, hey, what if we do a big storage underneath? Can we really reduce that outlet? And it was a big pipe, and it was still 30 feet deep. So the most cost effective at the time was to keep it small where we could, especially if it was deep, we wanted it smaller. We had the idea of keeping the 24-inch in ground that's out there today and using that just to drain the Union Lake and disconnecting from everything else, the Basil Street, the park, everything else was disconnected. So we gave them some ideas just to work with, knowing that they have the constraints of actual utilities and all that stuff that they were looking into as far as the design process. So I'm sure it's changed. I think they even have a squash box in there somewhere. So there's a lot of different things and elements. That's why we didn't want to talk about the ultimate design, because it supersedes our study. But it's still a part of the overall solution. So that's kind of why we told them, it's like, it needs to convey this much flow.
Yeah.
So that was their.
So you made a comment about a much larger pipe. Was that bigger than a 60-inch, like
no,
a 9-foot pipe?
We maintained the 60-inch all the way back, like an extra 1,000 feet to see if the storage would help. And it really didn't help too much. So we still, it helped a little bit, but not enough to warrant the extra cost of the pipe. So, so we looked at quite a few different alternatives, and I think Tony brought it up too. It was like when we first started this study, it seemed like the initial was like, get the L101 done and out of here, like get it to them now, like they need it now. So all of our focus was L101. Then after that was done, then we came back to all the other solutions. So I think that's what postponed a lot of the stuff here.
So I assume Michael Baker has been moving the hydrological design forward in the finals and doing certified and the whole bit. Jill, do we have what they? I assume there are plans that you have somewhere. Would it be worthwhile having Q3 go back and just verify? And you made a comment that it was based on the existing conditions, but did they also have to be constrained by potential future land use and because 101 in particular, at least one side of it, has the potential to have some pretty major uses, with the state upping zoning and doing all sorts of things. I just want to make sure when we bury this pipe, we aren't back in 30 years going, hey, we need another $50 million to do it again. I'd rather understand today our 30, 40, 50-year needs as we could best project them today so that we don't have to come back in less than 50 years and do anything with this pipe.
Yeah, so we gave them when I say existing conditions, it was the existing conditions, but we also gave them the ultimate conditions based on their plans at that time. So I believe there was like a 65% design. So on that one, we did use the ultimate general plan land uses in addition to whatever streets that they had at that time. I think they changed a little bit, but it won't make much of a difference, with respect to the overall flows.
Okay, great. Second item, is there anything we need to do, I think, from a budget standpoint, to authorize city manager to feel free to utilize? Do you need an indication from us? I think it's all within your signature authority anyways, I would guess.
Do you mean to continue with the study, or?
To just make sure whatever design we do fits, and I think there'll be tweaking. There has been tweaking already. Tom indicated he hasn't seen the final design, and to the degree that Jill deems it necessary, I just want to make sure you have any authorization you need and Jill needs to utilize Q3.
Well, I think we've fulfilled our budget for this year, so we'll bring back some talking points and some information for the next year's budget.
Okay, and then the last item, can we get a copy of the presentation, and will it get posted on the website too?
Yes and yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and I was kind of interested in the issue of the pipe diameter and the incremental costs for, keeping it all 60 inches, for example. It's just kind of seems strange to me that that would be a significant increase, that if you're digging a trench and shoring up and, whether that trench is 36 inches wide or 60 inches wide, doesn't seem like it would be that big a difference. But if our goal is to minimize surcharging, it seems to me that additional capacity could be beneficial. But I guess I should leave that to the engineers. It would be interesting to know what that additional cost would be. Meanwhile, I think that this has been a very valuable conversation. I think the report is very helpful. I talked to Mike Hansberger yesterday, and he had been up at 4 a.m. reading this very interesting report, and I thought hydrology at 4 a.m. seems a little dangerous, but meanwhile, it is amazing to look at the pictures and the science that goes into it and the technology, the computing. And you tipped your cap to Gary Murphy. Gary and I have known each other a long time. His son and my son played Pop Warner football, and he was the head coach of their team. Gary and I, over the years, have had countless conversations about flooding and stormwater in Leucadia. Some of those conversations have been rather animated because Gary and I both can get animated. Yep. But it is important. He has a lot of historic knowledge, and I appreciated his feedback. And I think that the one thing that I hope that folks in Leucadia understand is that we are not resting. We are working to solve these issues. And as Councilmember Lyons mentioned, it's an issue of resources, and we want to do everything we can to increase those resources. So I appreciate your indulgence, and we will, at this point, adjourn this meeting.
It's R. It's a software that you buy. You just buy it and you run it on your own computer. Yeah. 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 What's the screen size? You can, whatever you want to.